Protesters are still too young to vote. But frustrated by the result of the first round, they're demonstrating against both Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron.
This
is not what the majority of young people would have voted for. The candidates don't represent our age group, nor do they represent our ideas.
In the short term, Macron is perhaps less bad, because with Le Pen, we're of course expecting the worst, but in the long term, Macron will do more damage.
Some of them are calling for a boycott of the second round.
I
will be abstaining to respect my convictions, but also it's a bit of a strategy to try to weaken Macron when he's elected, as we're confident that it will be Macron who will win.
For others, though, abstaining is dangerous.
We shouldn't abstain, because if the rest of France votes for Marine Le Pen and we abstain, then she has a chance of winning. So we have to vote for the least worst option.
Holding anti-fascist and anti-capitalist banners, students blockaded or demonstrated in front of some 20 schools in the Paris area. Others marched on Bastille. Later, a few scuffles broke out with riot police, who sprayed tear gas after some protesters threw projectiles and smashed the bank's windows.
We'll have more news for you later. Time now for the France 24 debate. "100 days on, where is the most powerful nation on earth headed? Donald Trump, yet to fill his cabinet, yet to sign a major bill from the Republican-controlled Congress, yet to travel abroad. What has he done? Well, he's filled a Supreme Court seat, signed decrees, most notably pulling out of the Asia-Pacific TPP trade deal. He's ordered airstrikes in Syria, Yemen and Afghanistan, hawkish postures that contrast with the isolationist undertones of his campaign. Thus, the question begs, here in Paris and around the world, which way is Trump really headed? What's stature going forward for the United States of America 100 days on? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at what is the new normal in Washington and in the rest of the United States of America. With us from Washington is France 24 White House correspondent Philip Crowther. Thanks for being with us. From Nashville, political strategist and commentator Scotty Nell Hughes. Welcome to the show. It was a pleasure sitting down with him in the U.S. Capitol on Election Day. Journalist and commentator Fernando Espuelas is with us. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, François.
And from Washington, Pedro da Costa, editorial fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Let me correct you there. I'm actually senior correspondent of Business Insider now. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, that's the correction duly noted. Senior correspondent Business Insider, Pedro da Costa. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Pedro, I'll begin with you. What's been for you the signature moment of the first 100 days?
Well, I think I was just joking on Twitter that the first 100 days feels more like the first 100 years of solitude, because we've lived through so much that it's hard to grasp, especially when you ask for a single data point. It's almost impossible to pinpoint because so much has happened in terms of whirlwind, and yet so little has been achieved as far as policy is concerned. I would say that the most, if you had to pin me down, the single most important moment was the failure of Trump care, which then led to a loss of confidence in the entire agenda that Trump was bringing about. And we see that now in the reaction, the sort of skeptical reaction to the, I would call it a tax outline rather than a tax reform plan, because it was really just not even a real press release that they handed out yesterday. So very little has been achieved so far. But there's been a lot of stories to write because there's a lot of political chaos. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of unfilled positions, which means a lot of things are not getting done that need to get done.
Are you describing political chaos? But let me just go around the panel and just ask the rest of our panelists before we get back to some of those points. Let's see. Philip Crowther, your signature moment.
Tell you what really felt like the most important moment of the Trump presidency so far was when one of his promises clearly failed. That was his promise to curb immigration from 6 Muslim-majority countries, the travel, immigration and refugee ban that originally was called a Muslim ban by the candidate himself. The moment that that was stopped by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington State, I was at the White House at the time. It was already past nightfall, and it really did feel like this was the moment where the judicial branch had an impact on this presidency and on this president. The moment where he noticed that there would be some checks and balances, and we've seen those checks and balances from the judicial branch, but also from the legislative branch with, as Pedro just mentioned, the failure of Trump care when that didn't go through the House of Representatives. So that was really a wake-up moment for this White House when one of the big promises didn't make it through. And there have been many of those, after all. Many of the big promises that Donald Trump said he would sign into law or would repeal or would do something with on day one or during the first 100 days. In fact, very little of that has happened.
Fernando Espuelas, your signature moment so far.
Yeah, I think I would agree with my fellow panelists. There are achievements, but they're all negative achievements thus far. He split the Republican Party in a very dramatic way through what Pedro mentioned in terms of the health debate or the health care bill that failed. Certainly, the attacks on the courts have not really gone very well, even among Republicans. And I think, certainly as an observer of what's going on here in Washington, I think there's a real fear that he has really damaged the United States image abroad. The most recent comment was quoting the president of China as to some alleged ownership of Korea by China in historical times. There have been other moments like that.
But if there was one moment, what would it be?
Well, I think definitely what my colleague just mentioned in terms of having the court system step in and really clarify how the Constitution works for him, something that he has apparently not been in touch with or does not really know much about. Most recently, he said he would split up the Ninth Circuit Court, which obviously no president can do that under our Constitution.
Scotty Nell Hughes, what is your moment of the first 100 days?
Well, unlike the rest of the pessimists, the glass half empty on the rest of this panel, I seem to see the exact opposite. I'm looking at a president that has passed 28 pieces of legislation that's come across his desk, which have been passed by Congress, 25 executive orders. So that's more than we've had since Harry Truman. Definitely much more effective, much more efficient. And guess what? It did not involve us going billions of dollars in debt, like we saw the first 100 days of President Barack Obama. My colleagues mentioned a couple things about the Repeal and Replace Act, the first failure, and it looks like the second one is actually going to pass because for once the American people are still engaged in the political process. That's why that failed. It wasn't because of the Democrats. It wasn't even because of the Republicans. It's because the American people knew it was a bad bill and only 17% said it was good. Therefore, they actually stayed engaged and failed the bill. Then you look at the actual national borders. We have the lowest amount of illegals crossing of our borders in over 17 years. And internationally right now, we have a better diplomatic relations with many countries who over the last 8 years have dealt with a very weak, failing policy that has given us this turmoil.
But what is your one moment? What's your one moment, Scotty?
Of Islamic terrorism all across the world.
What is your one moment?
There's so many of them, but I would like to point out that President Trump was able to put in a Supreme Court justice that is that follows in the hand that was actually a constitutionalist, not necessarily an opinion, a ruling from opinion like the judges that we saw President Obama put into place. And the Ninth Circuit Court, by the way, if all of these rules, whether we're talking about the travel ban or sanctuary cities, if they actually were tried and true on law, they could go across any court. But magically, liberals and media pundits run straight to the Ninth Circuit Court. Hence why people are questioning right now, why does a judge have more power than a president that was elected by the people of America?
It's the Constitution of the United States which actually creates that check and balance, so we don't have nutcases running around.
Ninth Circuit Court, which has been time and time again. Go to other ones.
For your information, the ban was not blocked.
Well, try another court then. Why do they go to the same place?
No, wait a minute. You're not getting the basic facts of what you're saying correctly. You cannot go to the Ninth Circuit Court.
No, those are the facts.
The district court are the district courts are the ones who
appealed
stop the
this to
ban.
the same circuit court.
One at a time. Fernando Espuelas.
Excuse me. The appeal court both in Virginia, in New York, and in Washington are the ones who stopped the ban in different moments. So those are the facts. The Ninth Circuit Court said the trial should go forward. Those are the facts again. I think you're confusing these signing of bills. What the president did essentially is use a law that allowed him to overturn a lot of Obama's regulations. Okay, some of them are like allowing the mine companies to pollute rivers. I don't think that's much of an advancement for Americans, I don't think. The other one, which I think bears notice, is he's allowing now advisors, financial advisors, not to give true advice to their clients, but rather to look out for their own business. I mean, these are things that, of course, are needed for his constituents, people who fund him, but are not things that are actually helping Americans.
All right, let me ask Philip Crowther about something, because at the beginning of the show...
Hold on, can I just respond?
Very briefly, go ahead.
Let me just point out, consumer confidence is reaching the high that it's been in the last 16 years. That means our economy is growing. So despite what my fellow panelists just said and supposed his facts, our economy has been stagnant, and we raised $19 trillion in debt under his economics. I think it's good that we trust a businessman other than a politician. Those are the facts.
All right, Philip Crowther, there is one point to make, which is, of course, the stock market has soared since the election of Donald Trump. But we're seeing, of course, two visions of what's going on in the United States, two visions of what's going on in Washington. Pedro da Costa at the outset talks about political chaos. Just let me ask you, Philip, what's the White House press briefing like?
It's a lot more entertaining than it used to be. Things have changed quite drastically in this White House. You know that Sean Spicer is now a household name, not just here in Washington. He already was. But around the country, people are actually tuning in to the White House press briefing when during the time of President Obama, well, it was sometimes rather boring. That is because the spokespeople knew exactly what they were doing and maybe also weren't challenged quite as much as Sean Spicer is right now. He's having a hard time because he is representing a president who has told quite a few untruths during his time in the presidency. He has said things that are quite simply wrong, like, for example, the fact that, according to the president, millions of people voted illegally. That simply did not happen, and that is something that his spokespeople now have to defend. Maybe that is why this is such a popular show in Washington right now. There are a lot of interesting things developing at the White House on a daily basis. This is a president who makes news on a daily basis, and then he needs his spokespeople to defend him also on a daily basis. And remember that Sean Spicer, the White House spokesperson, some people would say it's a bit of a surprise he's actually still in his job. First of all, because of how hard it has been to defend some of the things his boss has said, but also because of some of his unforced errors. Remember that he compared Bashar al-Assad to Hitler and called the concentration camps in Germany Holocaust centers. He just about survived that one.
Philip, it's a learning process, or is it exactly the same today as it was on day one in the White House?
No, they've learned a little bit about how to communicate. Remember day one, I won't forget it, the first day after the inauguration, we got our first press briefing with Sean Spicer. Turned out it wasn't actually a briefing, it was a lecturing that we received from Mr. Spicer. This is, remember, the day he came out, forced by Donald Trump to do so, to talk about the inauguration crowd. And this is how this presidency began, and it's worth looking back at this 100 days in. This presidency began with the President Donald Trump saying that he had had the biggest inauguration in terms of viewing figures and people on the ground of all time. Again, that is simply not true. So that is a little bit of the feel, the atmosphere that we started with this White House, with us as journalists being berated. And since then, we've had a pretty tense relationship, after all, between the press and this White House. That is a relationship that clearly this White House wants to keep that way. And I think that is how it will continue over the next few days and months. There's been a lot of very good reporting about this White House, about quite a lot of chaos within the West Wing, and that will continue.
Pedro da Costa, you know, the old adage from the medium is the message, and the medium for Donald Trump is Twitter. And we've had a steady diet of surprises, like this one from March the 4th. Terrible. Just found out that Obama had my wires tapped in Trump Tower just before the victory. Nothing found. This is McCarthyism. What are your thoughts on the fact that, because, yes, you can argue about the fact that what he's saying has not been corroborated or substantiated, but what do you think of the way he's getting his message out?
So it's interesting. I cover the Federal Reserve and economics in particular. And the day after Trump was elected, I had trouble writing the story about what this meant for the Fed, because it seemed like there was so much more at stake at this point that, Fed policy was kind of falling to the back burner. And at the time, the article that I wrote said that we are now in for policy via presidential decree or a presidential tweet. And it's been that way a lot of times. There's so much volatility related to his announcements, whether they come through Twitter, or whether they come through dueling advisors who have different messages and different agendas within the White House. And so I would actually like to draw a parallel between your Trump surrogate guest that you have on, Scotty, I believe is her name, and the Trump administration, which is a whole lot of noise and bluster, but not a lot of information. So she talked a lot about confidence and this and that, but the reality is the U.S. economy is actually forecast to grow 0.2% at an annual rate this quarter. And consumer confidence is a soft indicator of economic data.
So why is the stock market high?
Let me finish, please. The hard indicators of economic data, like industrial output, business investment, consumer spending, they are all pointing downward. And that's in part because there's a great amount of uncertainty over the chaotic policies that Donald Trump is presiding over.
So why is the stock market high?
The stock market's higher because now
towards deregulation.
People with money on the Trump rally are selling to our 401ks who are going to buy it up, and then there's going to be a sharp sell-off within a number of 2 to 3 months.
Scotty Nell Hughes?
I love how they always have answers, and I love the reason why I think the American people, and just probably like the French people, what you're seeing right now in France right now, why there's such a relationship between our election and their election, is because you have media pundits go on air and time again act like they know more than what the people who are watching know. And they want to continue. And so when you see what's going on between Sean Spicer and the media, the people are siding with Sean Spicer. The people trust.
I'm not a media pundit. I am a journalist. I talk to more people than you probably ever do. So do not berate me about media punditry. Thank you very much.
That was very, very condescending, but thank you for being so sexist today. Let's go back to the fact that the American people right now have less faith in the media, and there is a reason why. And I imagine the same probably exists in other countries like France, because you have folks come on air and call themselves journalists, but obviously have an opinion and fail to show their opinion when they're reporting. And the people are being called out for it. They're being caught in this fact. So the reason why there is such contention is because what Sean Spicer and this White House has done is pulled the wool off the covers and shown that the media, majority of them in that press room right there, are actually liberals, and they allow their opinions to actually infiltrate and don't stick to the facts in regards to their reporting, and they're throwing a hissy fit and a tantrum from it. They're trying to stay relevant, and it's not working.
We're going to look at the hard facts of some of this policy when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.